You know that weird phenomenon when something bad happens and you just get this awful sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. It's almost like a mild shock. Your soul leaves your body. You're just in disbelief, not able to believe that this is happening to you. It's almost like you're in a movie because it's so surreal. And I think everybody's experienced this at some point in their lives to some kind of degree, which can vary, but it's like, I feel like it's most commonly experienced during something like a car accident or a bad injury, really any kind of loss, get fired, accidentally text somebody that you didn't mean to text, something embarrassing or about that person. And in the present, you're experiencing this strong shock. It could be pain, it could be any kind of discomfort or uncomfortable feeling. But even though the bad thing has already happened, you're almost more dreading the consequences of what it means in the future. And then also retracing your steps and agonizing over all the moments that led up to it and all the ways that you could have made a different decision and could have avoided that bad thing happening. And you're just running through all the contingencies in your head. And if I were to just leave 5 seconds earlier or later, I wouldn't have gotten into that car accident. So it doesn't even need to be your fault. And if it is your fault, then there's an added sense of guilt to everything else that you're feeling. And this moment, changes the trajectory of your life, whether it just be for the day or week, or if it's really bad, like the rest of your life, and nothing will be the same. And if that happens, like, you're also experiencing some sort of grief for what you've lost, whether that be a potential future or something that you had that you don't now. And you have to experience it. You can't go back. This can't be undone. It is permanent. And so you're kind of like trapped in the moment. And all of these emotions from each time designation, past, present, and future, are just assaulting you in the moments and resulting in this emotional torture. And I think everybody probably has one moment, at least, that has popped in their head as I've been talking about this. And yet, I don't think there's really a word for it. I don't think there's a word for the combined effect that all of these emotions have in this kind of crisis or disaster of a moment. Dread is a good word for that kind of impending doom, like something bad's going to happen and the fear of that, but it doesn't really account for the past and the regrets and the shock you feel. Trauma does a good job of the shock aspect of it, but really it's not something that you feel. It's not like I feel traumatic right now. And it also doesn't have that regret and doesn't necessarily imply something bad is going to happen, more just that it already has. And all those words are a part of this feeling, but there's no one word that adequately describes the bitter cocktail of all these emotions from past, present, and future just hitting you in the gut all at once. And I think that's unacceptable for something that we all feel. And I think it's about time that we have a word for that feeling. If nothing else, for a shorthand, because it's going to be a theme in this video and I don't feel like describing that feeling over and over again. And the word I've come up with for that sensation is dread chakra. Like something bad happens and then you're like, oh my god, I have so much dread chakra right now, you don't even know. And I know right now you're probably thinking to yourself, Chris, that's such a cool word, I don't know how you came up with it. You're so smart. But it's a mouthful, and I don't know if I want to say that when this happens to me. But I think it's kind of perfect because it's a lot to feel, so it should be a lot to say. But it is a mouthful. So for a 2-word phrase, or synonym for that, I've also come up with timeline torment. Timeline indicating the 3 designations or divisions of time: past, present, and future. And then torment, meaning severe anxiety or suffering. Combined, timeline torment. The definition of both being the pain or suffering from the combined feelings of dread, shock, and regret caused by a traumatic event or crisis. And another way you can put it is like, of all the ways this possibly could have gone, this is the worst option, and you are living on the worst possible timeline imaginable. And this is official. Like, I've already called the naming center of American English Association. Good old NCAEA. So it'll be in your dictionary soon. 2 new words to use, so you're welcome. And I bring this up because, as you've probably guessed, I've been dealing with some timeline torments, and not a short bout of it, but 11 years of it. After a couple of injuries have led me to have chronic health issues that make me feel like I am living on the worst possible timeline. And I'm about to air out some of that dirty laundry, so bear with me, because it's going to be tough. This is going to be a nutshell version, or summarized version of the story, because it is a long story, and that's not the purpose of this video, but it is important for context. My story starts in 2014. I was about to be graduating from college, super excited to start my life. It was about 2 weeks away. I was in school for audio recording. I was in the studio that the school had one day for like 10 to 12 hours straight, just working on my final project, probably in a super awful posture, looking up at a screen and not respecting my body, not thinking about my body whatsoever. And I get home, and what do I decide to do? I work out, because, you gotta grind. David Goggins, I don't even think I knew who that was at the time, but that's the same, mindset, unfortunately. So I was doing overhead press with admittedly too heavy of weight and with bad posture from the 10 to 12 hours of sitting with bad posture, and felt a snap or a crack or strain or some kind of sensation in the back of my neck, and felt a tingling over the top of my head, and instantaneously the world just went blurry. Everything was like out of focus. It was kind of like you're drunk or tipsy, but you're not dizzy. You're just kind of like loopy and disoriented. And instantaneously, timeline torment. Very strong case of timeline torment. Knew I had done something really bad right away. And my body just, especially my neck and head, just went tense. Had a hard time moving my neck. Cognitively, I was severely impeded. It was a hard time for me to just think and form coherent thoughts, find words. And I know this isn't how the anatomy works, but it felt like my brain was like unplugged from the back of my head. And I think probably just from the amount of tension that happened in the back of my head. And you'll still probably see it, like when I do that little twitch. Yeah. And I went to doctors, ran the gamut of like the different types of doctors, regular doctor, neurologist, chiropractor, physical therapist, acupuncture, and I think I'm forgetting some, but went to a lot of different people. Nobody could really pinpoint what was wrong. The test came back negative. There was really nothing abnormal. Some of the people kind of imply that it was all in my head, which when you're physically and cognitively suffering, and they think you're just kind of making it up, it adds to the dissonance of the situation. Yeah, so I really didn't have anything to go off of. I didn't even know what I was dealing with. There was no name, so it was like I was fighting this just invisible enemy. And after years of kind of doing my own research, I kind of just figured out that, or at least my theory is that it's just the most intense possible tension headache you could possibly imagine. And not headache in the sense that like there's like sinus, what I associated with a headache for all the years prior until this, because I had never experienced anything like this. It almost feels like your head is in a vice grip, and all the muscles in your temple and occipital, back of the skull area are just locked down. That led to TMJ problems, and I had a bunch of orthotics for that because there was so much pain in my jaw. When the muscles are that tight, there's like restricted blood flow. So restricted blood flow going to the brain, which is, I think, responsible for the cognitive deficiencies that I had. And those symptoms, they didn't go away. It wasn't like it waxed and waned. It wasn't like I woke up fine and then as the day went on and I was stressed, it got worse. This was perpetual all the time, and it was super intense. And the longer that went on, the more that I couldn't fix what was going on, the more that symptoms were getting worse, the more that timeline torment also got worse, and the more desperate I got. And I started doing physical therapy things and trying to resolve this like hours a day. I would meditate for an hour plus a day. I would do physical therapy for hours a day. And I was just terrified that this was going to be forever. So once again, overworking myself, not respecting my body's boundaries, doing things outside of my capacity, and from a bad motivation. And that led to the next injury. So 4.5 years into that journey, on Halloween, which is perfect because it's the holiday of horror and fear, I got a hiatal hernia, which for anybody who doesn't know what that is, that's when your stomach goes through your diaphragm, through the hole or hiatus in your diaphragm, into your chest cavity. And if it's severe enough, it is not fun. And it is excruciatingly uncomfortable. When that happened, I think my diaphragm just couldn't pump, and inhibited my breathing, and I had a full-blown panic attack. And I was driving at the time, and luckily I was able to pull over and get to a safe place. But it was a whole ordeal. My body went completely stiff. All the warmth drained from my body. I went into this decorticate response or posture. And, like the whole thing, ambulance, hospital. This was the first panic attack I have ever had, and thought I was dying. And according to the internet, it says panic attacks last from 5 to 20 minutes, but this was over 2 hours of that panic response and that panic state, and only was able to come down after getting medication. And unfortunately, that was just the start of this kind of next phase. The hiatal hernia was still there. Started having panic attacks very frequently, so much that I just stopped counting after a while. Usually, when I ate, presumably due to the stomach distending when you eat and further going into my chest cavity and further compressing things and further not being able to breathe. And all of these panic attacks lasted hours and presumably only subsided once the food kind of left my stomach and my stomach undistended or shrank. So even though I didn't stop eating, I developed a pretty healthy fear of eating, as you would imagine, because it just happened so frequently, the panic attacks. But it wasn't just the hernia that was giving me panic attacks, because after the first panic attack, it was as if all the tension that I had in my head and my neck from the previous 4 years spread to the front side of my body, and that included my throat. And it created this incredibly intense sensation that I was being choked. And it was like invisible hands were just around my throat, strangling me at all times. I don't know if this is the case for anybody else who's had panic attacks, where it feels like there's just tension not allowing you to breathe. But it was as if that physical sensation was just stuck even when I wasn't in a panic response. And the best way I've been able to describe this is that it feels like you're breathing through a kinked straw, and you could hear it. Like, I would try to breathe and it would have this whistling sound, which is called stridor. And once again, it wasn't like these symptoms were transient or come and go. They were nonstop, all the time, 24/7. And with the hernia not allowing me to breathe from the diaphragm, not being able to pump, and with the choking not allowing me to breathe from the physical sensation, but also the literal reduction of air being able to go into my lungs, it was as if I was living perpetually on the edge or on the tipping point, just about to go into a full-blown panic response. And like the smallest thing would just tip me over the edge and go into a full-blown panic attack. And it did. And the smallest things could tip me over into it. And usually one of the big ones for that was driving. So after a few panic attacks while driving, I eventually stopped driving. And yeah, I was in a downward spiral that I couldn't get out of, and couldn't breathe, obviously. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep, just because of how much discomfort I was in, and that got worse when I was horizontal. That hiatal hernia pressure got worse. I basically just could do enough of those things to survive. And if my nervous system was in a freak out mode before this, from the headache and the tension and all that stuff, now it was just in overdrive. And it got to the point where all foods, doesn't matter what it was, just wrecked me. And I eat pretty well before this even, but the healthiest food in the world was still destroying me, just because I couldn't get into that parasympathetic rest and digest state, which is when your saliva production is able to produce. And I could feel that I wasn't producing saliva and I wasn't breaking down food, so food would just go through me, not digested well, and it would just destroy my gut. It would just create this awful negative cycle. So I was in a physiological free fall, essentially. And I obviously wasn't getting a lot of nutrition, and my body needed fuel to be in this survival mode. So it started breaking itself down for fuel, and I quickly lost 50 pounds in a very short amount of time, to the point where I was just skin and bones, like a skeleton, and I could barely move or walk. And once again, I tried a lot of different things. I went to a lot of different doctors, a lot of different types of professions, and wasn't really getting anywhere. Yeah, there's definitely factors regarding the hernia and the panic attacks and methods for treating such things that I don't feel like going into right now, just because it's a deep rabbit hole and trying to make this as short as possible. And then I developed these, I don't even know what it was, autoimmune reactions is what I've been calling it. When I would eat, it would just feel like my brain was going to explode, and there was just this pressure and pain at the deep kind of like core of my head. Still don't know what it was to this day, but that contributed, along with the hiatal hernia and the distending into my stomach, just this fear of eating. And I never did stop eating, but I was still just terrified to eat. So yeah, it wasn't looking good for me for a while, and I'll just leave it at that. And after a year of kind of that state, I found the autoimmune protocol diet. It's a restrictive diet, and I couldn't even eat all the foods on that. But through that list, I found 8 foods that I could tolerate better. I still couldn't tolerate any food well, just because of my body where it was at, but I tolerated those foods better, and I lived off those foods. And through those 8 foods, I was able to kind of stop the bleeding, and I gained my weight back in about a year. And as you can imagine, by this point, my timeline torment is just skyrocketing exponentially, constantly regretting the decisions that led me to this point, and kind of like in and out of shock, just not able to believe that this is happening, and always in this state of dread, not only for the panic attacks, but like just for what this means for my health, for my longevity, for my future. Despite stopping the bleeding with finding those 8 foods and gaining my weight back and looking more like a normal human being, the symptoms were just as intense, just as awful. And I had found myself at a level of rock bottom that I did not know to be possible. And just for time's sake, I'm not going to delve into everything I faced in that time, both physically or mentally. But I had dealt with the worst of that rock bottom period of my hiatal hernia and choking for a period of about 6 years. And once again, this is not supplanting the headache, the tension headache, and all the tension in my neck and everything from the 4.5 years prior to that. This was in addition to. And I also forgot to mention that 2 years prior to any of this, I had 2 major ear surgeries that left me with hearing loss in my left ear and tinnitus, which was tolerable. But within this 6-year period, the tinnitus skyrocketed and got to an intolerable level. And so, yeah, it wasn't my favorite decade that I've lived, to say the least. And all made worse by the implication that it's had on my family. And I'd be remiss not to mention my family at this point, even though, I was isolated in the sense that nobody could really help me and nobody can really fight this fight for me. I definitely was not alone. My sister, who's always been super supportive, was great and helpful, but my parents were my heroes. And even though they couldn't physically help me, they couldn't alleviate any of the symptoms despite their best efforts, they're truly unconditional love and support was the biggest reason why I was able to make it out of that rock bottom period. Yeah, the Lamb fam was brilliant in this time. With their support, my life has just been consumed with trying to get out of this hell, and been to so many different health providers and talked to people all over the country. And a lot of these people that I've met within that period have been great. Not all of them, but a lot of them were really great. I learned a lot from. Just my situation is kind of like an enigma with this weird combination of multiple different injuries. And eventually I decided to get active in my own rescue and start to learn this stuff for myself so I can quote unquote fix myself. As you can imagine, it's just hard for me to focus when I'm in as much discomfort as I am, and my mind kind of always being pulled to the symptoms because they're that intense. So it's hard for me to really learn. The body is a very complex creature, and I didn't really know what to learn, and I obviously couldn't go to school. So it's just been tough. Now, I'm sure at this point, you're thinking, Chris, this story is super depressing. I'm about to click off. Don't, because it's about to get better. And I know this story has been as depressing as to listen to as it has been to tell, I'm sure. But thank God I'm about to talk about a turning point.